Welcome again to GPS, God's Prophetic Surprises, the program where we take an intergenerational approach to the book of Revelation. I'm Jon Paulien. I'm a professor of religion at Loma Linda University, and with me is Guillermo Borda, who is a doctoral candidate at Andrews University and a pastor at Mentone Church, Seventh-day Adventist Church in Southern California. And then on the other side, I have Gustavo Assis, who is also a doctoral candidate, but this time in Old Testament, and he's also a pastor at the Anaheim Seventh-day Adventist Church. And then there's Iris Mamier, who is a professor of nursing at Loma Linda University, and who joins us to give some perspectives that are unique to her profession, I think, from time to time. We look forward to that every time. Just want to say, the reason that we chose GPS, God's Prophetic Surprises, is that whenever you go deep into the scriptural text, if you're really paying attention, you'll be surprised. Some people read the Bible only to confirm what they already believe. But if you honestly look at the text, you're going to be surprised. And you're going to have to change your mind from time to time. And I'm here to announce that just this week I have changed my mind on a significant question in chapter 19 of the book of Revelation. But I'll hold that until we get to that part, perhaps in the next program or the one after. But I just want you to anticipate that it's possible for someone to study the Bible professionally for 45 years and change their mind about the text. That the text itself will teach you something new, that God's prophetic surprises are real, and they happen, and they often happen right at this table. So we're going to look forward to that. We'll hold the details until we get to that part of the chapter. But I invite you to open Revelation 19, and we're going to go to verses 9 and 10, which are kind of standing by themselves. Verses 1 to 8 is a continuous narrative. Verses 11 to 21 is a continuous narrative. These two verses don't seem to fit neatly into either one of those. So Iris, would you read those two verses for us and invite you all to join us as well as we read the biblical text.
Then he said to me, "Write, blessed are those who are called to the marriage supper of the Lamb." And he said to me, "These are the true sayings of God." And I fell at his feet to worship him. But he said to me, "See that you do not do that. I am your fellow servant and of your brethren who have the testimony of Jesus. Worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy."
So when we left off, I think we raised the question, who is he? It says, he said to me. Now some texts say something else. Did any of you have something different than he said to me in verse 9? Yeah, all that. Okay, that's accurate to the text.
Oh, my version has the angel.
The angel,
yeah,
okay.
So they interpreted the reference.
Yeah, so the angel is not here. And of course, that doesn't even tell you what angel in a real sense. But the text actually simply says it's the word for says with the third person singular, masculine. So it's he says. Doesn't say it's an angel, doesn't say anything else. So the question is, who's he? Who is this person? And there are several options I'll throw out, and then we'll see what the rest of you think about it. First of all, there's the voice from the throne in 19:5. He says to me, all right? And that's the nearest antecedent. Okay, so that sounds impressive at first, at least. Second option is this is John's accompanying angel back in verse 1 of chapter 1. So you go back to the beginning of the book, and it says Jesus receives the message from his Father, hands it to an angel who hands it to John. So maybe this is the accompanying angel that's been all the way through. The third option is it's the angel of chapter 17, verse 1, because there's no angel in between. The angel of 17:1, which is the one of the plague angels who comes to talk to John. That sort of governed these last couple of chapters. So what do you folks think? Which of those explanations, or maybe you have a fourth one that's even better?
I think, to me, when I look at the text, we have to see it in a way that will fit with verse 10. Because it seems that the one in verse 9 is the same as verse 10. There is, so then I would say that would be against being the voice from the throne, because this is an entity that he's not supposed to worship. And you think about the voice from the throne. Well, if it's a voice from God, you could worship. If it's one of the four living creatures, then yes, wouldn't be, right? But I think if you were, to be honest, if you were one of the four living creatures, I think you would stay one of the four living creatures. They are more
usually
distinct, So to me, it seems to be an angel. It's very similar to what happens in chapter 22, verses 8 and 9.
Yeah, that's right. So you kind of throw a monkey wrench into the most obvious answer, which would be the nearest antecedent. 5 verses before, you do have a masculine singular voice. But if that's the voice of God, then he's not going to stop John from worshiping him. And maybe John made that connection himself, So
I have one question here in verse 6. My ESV reads, "Then I heard what seemed to be the voice of a great multitude." So the voice here is singular. Could that be an antecedent for the he said?
Could that be? Well, let me just see.
Sorry, which verse?
Verse 6.
Yeah.
Verse 6.
But then there's the voice of a great multitude.
So it is the great multitude, certainly. I mean, we talk about a lot of people, but it's the voice, singular.
Yeah. But does that fit with the idea, I
is the
fell in
voice or
his feet to
sound?
worship him? The voice might be singular, but it's a great multitude.
Yeah.
So it's a choir.
So he could go down and worship them, maybe. But yeah, that doesn't, a good suggestion, but it doesn't quite fit, I think.
And then will be a bunch of people saying the same thing in verse 10. You must not do that. And treating it as a first person. I am a fellow servant.
Yeah.
I mean, the previous verses don't solve the issue here.
But that's a good illustration of how to approach the Bible. You see, you don't rule out any possibility. You absorb the text to where it becomes part of you, and they say, well, could it be this? You see, and that's how you rule out a lot of crazy things, and then sometimes the better one comes up.
One difference between this event, this little scene, and the one in chapter 22 is that over there, when something similar happens, it explicitly tells us that it is at the feet of the angel who showed me these things. But here it doesn't really specify.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just, he says, and this one comes before the other one in chapter 22. So which of the two sounds better, the angel from chapter 1 or the angel from chapter 17? Which sounds better? Iris?
I would like to propose chapter 17, and the reason being, the context here is, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters." And I think throughout 17, 18, 19, where we are, that's really what we have been dealing with. That is really the context is Babylon and the fall of it.
No, I like your thinking on that. It seems to me that if he was throwing the ball all the way back to chapter 1, he should say so. Say, "The angel who is with me from the beginning said to me." Well, he doesn't. Just he says to me. It's like you ought to know who this is. You see.
In my observation of these chapters here, just glancing over them, 17 and 18. So we have one of the 7 angels in 17, right? Presenting the vision to John. And then in 18:1, we have another angel from heaven. And we have in verse 4, 18:4, another voice from heaven. And it seems to be the last singular voice throughout these chapters. Then in 19 you have, and end of 18, the sound of a great multitude over and over. So, yeah, is it fair to say, is it safe to say that we have only one angel
Well, there's
from
the angel
17?
in chapter 18 as well. The first verses of chapter 18.
Yeah.
Right? But that one, it depends on how you interpret that angel. Right? Because so some scholars believe this is a heavenly angel because the thing is that I'm sorry, but I won't remember the name of the scholars particularly. But it mentions that in chapter 18, verse 1, after these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. It has been pointed out that there's no other time in the book of Revelation where glory is used with specific reference to an angel, which then leads some scholars to believe this is actually Jesus. Now, other scholars think maybe this glory is because this angel just came from the presence of God, kind of like Moses when he had to put the veil. So there's debate, in that regard. So if this angel in chapter 18, verse 1, if this angel is Jesus, which of course he represents the movement of his people proclaiming these messages, but if at least in the vision, if it is Jesus himself, then it will be no problem for worship, as we have seen in chapter 5.
Yeah,
if it is another angel, a creature, then it will be a candidate, an option as well. It will be closer to the passage than the one in chapter 17. But really, it depends on how you understand this angel here.
I like what Guilherme is saying, because I have one issue here that I wanted to ask you all. Why is John attempting to worship this particular angel? I mean, what this angel said to him, blessed are those who are invited to the marriage of the supper of the Lamb. And then he said to me, these are the true words of God. How come this is prompting him to worship this creature or this being, when in chapter 4 and 5, much more exuberant and exciting and inviting to worship? I don't remember if John attempts to worship or joins in the worship scene in chapters 4 and 5, but here why these words prompt him to attempt a worship?
Well, I would throw the other question out. What's wrong with worshiping an angel? I mean, aren't they far greater than human beings? If you're going to worship a football player or a movie star, angel would certainly top that. I mean,
That's a very good question, because it is an important question for the theological point that is made by these passages, right? Both here in chapter 22, verses 8 and 9. Now, in chapter 22, verse 8 and 9 is very explicit, right? Where it talks about, I, John, am the one who heard and saw these things. And when I heard and saw, I fell down to worship at the feet of the angel who showed me these things. So he's trying to worship an angel in that case, right?
Yeah.
So let's see what happens. And it says, but he said to me, do not do that. I am a fellow servant of yours and of your brethren, the prophets, and of those who heed the words of this book. Worship God. And so, and this is really central to the book, central to the message of the three angels in chapter 14, verses 6 onwards. It's central to the whole, crisis with the beasts and Babylon. Is, should we worship only God, or can we worship a creature as well? There's a call to worship only the Creator.
well, this is where you get a word called monotheism. And monotheism is the idea that there is one God. And Christians are monotheists. Even though there's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, they still see it as one God. And exactly how the one and the three come together is a fascinating story throughout history. But Christians are monotheists, as Jews and Muslims are as well. And the whole idea of monotheism is that you could like draw a line, and everything above the line is God, and everything below the line is not God. You worship God, you do not worship anything below the line. Doesn't matter if it's an angel, doesn't matter if it's a superstar human being, doesn't matter if it's a car or whatever. Worship of anything below the line is idolatry. And the whole idea of idolatry, we think of statues and stuff. Well, that's that's an important piece of it, but that's because they are worshiping something that is not God. You see, so this is an important concept for monotheism, which the angel is saying, no, worship's inappropriate. I'm below the line, just as you are. So that's a biblical view makes a strong distinction between the two.
And that's an interesting thing, right? Because this idea, I'm a fellow servant, shows us that all the creatures of God, regardless of whether they are heavenly angels or human beings on earth, the faithful ones are servants of God. They are not semi-gods, or anything like that. You have the creatures, like you mentioned that line, the creatures that when they're faithful, they serve God, and then you have God.
Yes.
I think the challenge is also that Christ, Jesus, is so humble that he sometimes shows up as Michael, as in an angelic form. So there could be confusion, in fact. Who is it that I am up against? And I think throughout the prophetic, the end-time literature, the issue of deception is such a dominant one, because there is a fallen angel who imposters, who claims something that is not, that he's not entitled to. So he demands worship from Jesus, right? And I think that confusion is an issue throughout the end time, to worship that which doesn't deserve to be worshipped, and not worship the one who deserves to be worshipped. And I think in this day and age, you invited me to bring in my nursing perspective. A couple of years ago, I actually did a study with a colleague of yours from the School of Religion. And we asked nurses, we gave them basically a scenario, and we asked, what would you do if a patient asked you to pray with them before going to surgery? And then it was fun because we asked them to, if they prayed, to write out that prayer. And then we analyzed, we did qualitative analysis on these prayers, which was a fun project. And there were a lot of insights gained on prayer that could actually be useful even for our Adventist schools of nursing, where we have a lot of non-Adventist and sometimes even not Christian students, who are intrigued with our philosophy and who are wondering, well, but what do I do with this prayer thing? I didn't grow up with that, And the results of the study give us really a structure and tell us something on how they can learn how to pray in a professional context. But the story that was interesting, there are some deviant cases, and one was praying to angels, which in the New Age environment in which we now live is very prevalent, So I think this text has, and so, when we wrote up the study, we cautioned against that. And we said, don't assume just because you are praying to angels that is appropriate for your patient. You better assess to whom are you praying. And whatever the patient says, that is what is appropriate.
Well, I like what you said, because it reminds me that there was an issue with worship of angels in the first century, right? I think Colossians describes a scenario in a particular congregation, a Christian environment, in which there were people worshiping angels and praying to angels. So is it possible that this was also an issue in Asia Minor, where let's say John's audience is primarily located?
Yeah, I think so. In the ancient context, deities were often seen to be kind of on a hierarchy, different levels, etc. And Christianity comes in, and Judaism as well, and just says, no, there's no levels, there's only a single line. There's either God or creation. God is not created, creation is created. That's the difference. Do not worship creation, do not worship a created being, do not worship nature, do not worship angels, etc. There's only one who's worthy of worship. So I think this is definitely reacting to this idea, you know, you got the gods who live behind that tree, and then there's the one that's over this county, and then there's the one that's over our nation, and maybe there's one even higher than all those, you know. So you have these gradations, but Judaism and Christianity stood apart from that.
When you look at the theology of the book of Revelation, this passage in chapter 19, as well as that similar passage in chapter 22, verse 8 and 9, these are important passages in helping us understand or see evidence for the divinity of Jesus in the New Testament, in this case in the book of Revelation, right? Because in chapter 5, Jesus is worshipped as well. And so the fact that here the worship of an angel is rejected, and one is pointed to worship God alone, right? And the fact that then God allows, or the Father allows Jesus to share in the worship, then reveals to us that this is a strong evidence that Jesus is divine. And so it's just, there's of course many more pieces in the New Testament, but these are just some of the pieces in the book of Revelation showing the divinity of Jesus.
Let me move to the next verse here. In verse 10 comes something that's very, very interesting. It says, I fell at his feet to worship him, but he said to me, do not do it. I'm a fellow servant with you and with your brothers who hold to the testimony of Jesus. Worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. What is this testimony of Jesus? What have you seen when you examine that concept?
The way I would put it is Jesus has not left his church without a witness. He communicates with his followers. And as it says here, is the spirit of prophecy. God and Jesus has used messengers to communicate with us, in a prophetic way, as mouthpieces of God. So I'll say the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. That means that Jesus bears witness to us through messengers. And of course, the most notable example, of course, is what we see in the New Testament. But then Jesus bears witness to us through mouthpieces, prophets, through the spirit of prophecy in that regard.
Is this concept of witness live in the Old Testament? Off the top of your head, is there an idea of witness? Does this have an Old Testament background, or is it a more New Testament thing?
I mean, any judicial setting would require at least two or three witnesses.
Yeah,
And I
that's
think
right.
we have that in divine judgment passages too, right?
Yeah.
Like the idea of witnessing.
Yeah, so and in establishment of a covenant, there's always the invocation
Okay.
of witnesses.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So witnesses establish covenants. They establish, legal basis, etc. So it is a legal kind of word here. I think the critical text is actually in chapter 1 on this. And chapter 1 and verses 1 to 3. The revelation of Jesus Christ. This is how the book of Revelation opens. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show to his servants what must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel. So Jesus has an angel. He sends his angel to his servant John, who testifies to everything he saw. That is the word of God and the testimony of Jesus Christ. Blessed is the one who reads the words of this prophecy. Blessed are those who hear it and take heart what is written in it, because the time is near. So you see a kind of a chain of revelation here. There's something that God gives to Jesus, and that is called the revelation of Jesus Christ. There's something that the angel gives to John, and that is the testimony of Jesus. There's something that John gives to the church, and that's the book of Revelation, the things that are written in this book. So you have 3 stages of this revelation. God gives something to Jesus. Jesus gives it to John through his angel. John gives it to the people. Some scholars believe the testimony of Jesus is the book of Revelation. And I see this as saying, no, it's not the book of Revelation. That's a different level. It's what John saw. John's vision is the testimony of Jesus. And therefore, in Revelation 12:17, John projects that that will happen again at the end of time. That someone at least will have a visionary gift like John's. Chapter 12:17. The dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus. So I would argue the testimony of Jesus is the kind of visionary gift that John had. And he's saying that at God at the end time will re-gift that to his church. That there will be a live, visionary type of testimony that would come to the church. And that's confirmed, I think, when you go to the text you were talking about, Jeremy, in 22:8 and 9, which is a similar statement to 19. John, I, John, am the one who heard and saw these things. When I heard and seen them, I fell down to worship at the feet of the angel who had been showing them to me. But he said to me, do not do it. I am a fellow servant with you and with your brothers, the prophets. Okay? In chapter 19, he says, I'm a fellow servant with you and with those who have the testimony of Jesus. So the testimony of Jesus, as I would understand it, is not just the book of Revelation, it's not the gospel, it's actually a prophetic visionary gift that John had, and that he projects here will not leave the church in the last days. So that's sort of where I'm at. And testimony of Jesus then, it could be either the testimony Jesus gives, or it could be our testimony to him. And here it's clearly that first. The testimony Jesus gives was in person when he walked this earth. But it comes through visionary means to the prophets. And we can anticipate that the gift of prophecy is not dead. But then that's a longer story for another time. So, one of God's prophetic surprises is that John's visionary gift is coming back. And that will be a surprise to many people. This has been GPS. See you again next time.